with Renee.
Yo. We wait all week and all day for more Saturdays with Renee.
Yes. What's up, world? Welcome to episode 72 of Saturdays with Renee.
Good thing I didn't look too crazy. Lord.
That's Renee.
Look, for
Jared.
people who thought I wasn't a real person, at least, there you go.
Yeah. Well, AI is pretty advanced now. You can get, AI companions and all kinds of stuff. So who knows? People might still, the conspiracies run deep in some of these chat streets.
It's very true.
Alas, everybody, we are not live. Just to relax the chat, the undefeated chat, who we appreciate being here live with us. Circumstances necessitated a pre-record, but we have a great show for you. Please do like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, where you will get another great edition of the review crew featuring Ntume Gant talking about the films The Monk and the Gun and Burn.
Burn exclamation. So people
exclamation.
Don't. Yes.
Right.
So
in the 1969-70 featuring Marlon Brando, not the more recent, whatever that was.
Right.
Because I noticed that when I was looking for the film. I hadn't seen this more recent one, so I don't know what it is, but it's not that.
Yeah, I don't know either, but it's not the one we talked about.
The one about colonialism and African rebellion featuring Marlon Brando. That's the one we talked about. It was a fantastic conversation. So please check that out. And thanks to our patrons over there. And yeah, Renee, how, what's
Look, I'm all about giving the people what they want. So I think we just do what we always do. We'll bring Claudia up and then
boom.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
Claudia has stepped in the room. Welcome back.
Peace, y'all. How's it going?
Good. Thank you.
Yes.
What do you say, Renee, as doing as well as
I am doing as well as capitalism allows. There you go.
Yeah, that's really funny. I'm gonna
what do they say with the post-colon sentence being part of the sentence being if you're not part of the black bourgeoisie.
Right.
We don't want to confuse folks because sometimes
leadership class will get
you.
They might feel like it's all right. They don't mind capitalism. Yeah. Like it works for me, boss.
Well, people got buy-ins and shit. Or boycotts, right?
I
can't, yo.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That just sounds so whack. It doesn't even sound strong. It doesn't even sound tough.
Terrible.
It doesn't sound tough.
It's just not even a good idea. It's not even like a good rephrasing. It's terrible.
It's terrible all around, but you can't. Coming from a literal rat,
Yeah.
But please just quickly, let me shout out you, Renee, again. Please, folks, if you missed it, go back and watch the previous week's episodes where Renee really broke down why we're now having this somewhat comedic moment where the effectiveness of DEI and all of this was sort of meticulously laid out to show that we're only literally fighting here for that 3% black representation on the board of Target.
Right. And not only that, we're fighting to get back to the 3% that we lost when Target implemented their DEI policy.
Right, because it went down. That's right. It got worse.
What's happening right now?
The hustle
I don't
here
even understand. The hustle is real. the hustling.
Good thing
of
we have
Lima.
someone who could help us talk about a longer con. Speaking of
Yeah, I
hustling.
was gonna say, what did Ori say recently? That's, obviously like counterinsurgency
The liberal
tactic, right?
counterinsurgency. That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Exactly.
Shout out to Dylan and Ori and
Yeah,
Jared Ware.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Ah, all right.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, right?
God bless you.
But I
All
think
right.
it's, yeah, I think all
So,
things are, yeah.
so why don't we start, Cloud, with you telling everybody who you are, and then I will explain how I convinced you to come on.
Yeah.
Because and then we'll get going.
Yes. So yes, peace everyone. I'm Clau or Claudia. Clau's usually just easier for folks to pronounce, but yeah, I am a member of Black Alliance for Peace. I'm a contributor for Black Agenda Report, and I'm one of the co-coordinators of the BAP Haiti Americas team. And I'm based in Lima, Peru.
Look at that. Guests from around the world.
That's
Can we
right. Global South
can
connection.
can you forgive the ignorance that I'm representing here? But sorry,
No.
Renee. But can I just could you just say a word about the lay of the land in Lima? Like, it's not admittedly, it's not a region of the world we hear much about.
Yeah,
It's not referenced much unless you watch like world football. It's like Peru got,
well, yeah,
like
yeah,
I'm deeply into that. But but yeah, if you just quick lay the land and like
yeah,
please.
yeah, absolutely. I find it yeah, it's interesting that you said, right, like people don't think about Peru until it's like around World Cup time, or sometimes not, because we don't always qualify, which is often the case.
Well,
sadly.
but I also watch a lot of the America's Cups.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the stuff around, so I kind of get into
So
it. And it
know
almost
it.
looked like you had a kit on. I wasn't. Yeah, I was going to say right. So
this is my team here. This is the home team.
all right. So
Universitario.
So
Yeah, no, long time. I mean, uncles, grandfather, the whole family. I was born into this, as they say here. But yeah, I mean, so it's funny, yeah, around like when it's like anything to do with football is, I feel like when people remember, or the international community remembers, right? Oh yeah, Afro-Peruvians are a thing, right? But then also, and politically, I think, and I was on last 2 years ago when the coup here first happened. And I came here the day after, or the day before the general strike started, which was maybe like a little under a month after the coup against President Castillo had happened at that time, back in December 7th, 2022. So very much still an ongoing struggle. I mean, he's still locked up. This current dictatorship's first political prisoner of many, which are still, languishing in horrible conditions, pre-trial detention, right? Detención preventiva, as they call it here, right? Preventative detention. And so yeah, Lima is the capital of Peru. It's coastal. It's a coastal city. And if you listen to the comrades on the street, and particularly in the south of Peru, which is where it's higher up in the Andes, and it's very much where the bulk of the resources of this country, and Peru is one of the most resource-rich countries in the region, probably the world. The gold, or like we have every region of the world here, right? So the Amazon, we have the desert, the Pacific Ocean. So quite a lot of resources. And so therefore, that U.S. empire is not far behind, setting up their bases and such. And so, yeah, Lima is the capital of the country. As the comrades in the South always say, it's, Lima is where picks up after Spain leaves, right? So they become the neo-colonial centralist capital that is just, and it's made for and by criollos, right? So the children of these colonizers that set up their own system and effectively, reimposed a different form of colonialism, so neocolonialism here, and that's definitely the system we live under, right? But again, and I think like many major cities around the world, certainly in the U.S., right? You have the center, but then you also, even in the city, have the different cones or the different, you might even consider it like, I grew up in Jersey and New York. So you might consider it the different boroughs, right? So you have the Cono Norte, Cono Sur, right? Which are certainly more working poor regions. And even a lot of the folks that live there are themselves forced internal migrants from, either the Andes or the Amazon or just different regions outside of the capital, or their children, right? And these are, especially if you go to the cerros, which are just like literally the dirt mounds, right? You see it, if you think about Brazil, right? It looks like you might think about favelas, right? The cerros are literal shanty towns that don't have access to potable water, that, it's no infrastructure, right? Kids have to walk hours, maybe less in Lima, even in the conos of Lima, but certainly in the provinces, kids are forced to walk like hours before they get to their closest education center. So it's definitely, a very resource-rich country, but very poor people. And this is, the effect of colonization, neocolonialism, U.S. imperialism, certainly. And we can talk more, about that, and especially Southcom's expanding role in the region. As it prepares for war with China, it is militarizing the Pacific Ocean up and down. Right, Space Command, it has quite a few bases, military bases that are being built here, especially up in the north of Peru, which is where not the only pocket of Afro-Peruvians that live, but certainly one of the largest ones, right? So my Afro-Peruvian family is from Piura in the north, and that's the coastal part. And yeah, so it is, it is a neocolonized and ravaged by imperialism, ravaged by 30 plus years of neoliberal politics at the barrel of US guns, literally through the Fujimori dictatorship, and even before that, but really cemented through that dictatorship. And even though that former dictator is dead now, Fujimorismo, his legacy, absolutely lives on, not just through his kids that are literally still here, political operatives and members of the Senate, but the system that he quite literally laid down for years. So, pardon about that. Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. Organic interviewing.
But yeah, so yeah, that was a Peru number too, so we'll see. But yeah, so Lima, right, is at the center of this. It's but it's interesting, right? Like, it doesn't quite rain as much here, so we don't, like, you can't really grow food here, right? So everything is imported from outside of the regions, right? The water comes from the Andes, literally the crops, food, everything is coming from outside. So it is, and there's definitely beautiful ways that so many different organizers and writers have sort of thought about this, right? Lima's sort of this like extracting resources and this octopus that's taking from everything, right? And then exporting it out, right, to Europe and the US, right? The profits don't stay here. Well, they stay in the internal, elite, right? In the internal neocolonial elite. But the bulk of the profits are obviously going to, mining companies in Canada and NATO and Southcom expansion, right? certainly military contractors is huge, right? Israeli weapons contractors is absolutely a huge partner in this web, right? It's a US EU NATO axis of domination, and I'll shout out my organization all day long, but I mean, this is right. This is a real consequence of what we've been saying, and not just us, right, but like before, right, but of that tradition, of that Black radical peace tradition, that these struggles need to be interconnected, because they are, right. Newark, right, I grew up in Kearney, New Jersey, right outside of Newark, where they filmed The Sopranos, is my hometown's claim to fame. But I mean,
which Todd calls Dr. Todd Stephen Burrows, my homeboy. Happy belated birthday, by the way, to him and Huey Newton. But he always calls The Sopranos a documentary.
Yes, that I say that all the time. I literally say, I'm like, that was actually a documentary what it was like growing up in North Jersey, 100%. Yes, I definitely
That's
agree.
wild.
Listen, early 2000s North Jersey had some interesting connections to some really good drugs. I feel like we would have lots of stories around this. There was a direct connection to the Andes.
Oh yeah. Could you, before we switch topics, because I'm fascinated by everything you kind of just broke down about Lima and Peru, can you talk just a little bit about like what the revolutionary forces or the radical forces are in the area, like what that looks like from that side of things, as because as always you have people who are trying to fight the system that exists. So I'm just curious what that also looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the country, right, there's certainly, and there's a long time history of, particularly in the provinces, some in the city, but more out in the provinces, that organization is pivotal and is permanent, right? And this is a constant. I am privileged to live here in the global South and organize in the global South, because that is the one thing that I have, or many, I have many qualms with the USCN left, right? And then like, how do we what is a left, right? That country's so far to the right that, folks like IOC are considered left. And so, right, that has no real basis, material basis. So, but folks here, and it's not just Peru, it's certainly regional, and I'm sure in the global South, folks are very much unionized. If they're not unionized, they're in associations. Like, people are organized through whichever sector they live in or work in, right? So as the coup happened, some of the first people that came out to protest it was indigenous campesinos, right? So people were coming down from, and this wasn't just in Lima, but throughout. And in fact, most of the violence was in the south of Peru, right? Most of the massacres are concentrated in the south, and not coincidentally, right along the mining corridor, which is the richest parts of the country in terms of resources, right? So the folks came down from the cerros, from the the mountains, literally going into their like central city, protesting against that, and the police and the military open fire, right? Like literal massacres, right? One of the bloodiest days was January 9th, 2023 in Juliaca, Puno, at the airport, and around that area, where 18 people died in one day, and eventually I think 19 was total. One person died of complications afterwards. And so almost immediately, right, the families started organizing. And again, I think being here gives me interesting perspective, because the organizing here the perspective is so historical, particularly when you're organizing with indigenous communities, because it is a struggle that they've waged for over 500 years, and they understand that, right? So, and they are, and they say that in the way they organize with amongst each other, in the way that they are writing and propaganda they're producing, whether or not they call it propaganda or not, right? But work they are producing, you know, and culturally, right? Culturally, you know, that is such a good, crucial part of the struggle. Is music, is art that you know, really calls or theorizes this and understands this as a protracted struggle. So that yes, there are associations of the families of the martyrs and injured. There are indigenous campesino communities themselves that are in associations or organizations longstanding. The one of the longest organizations, FREDEPA, which is the translated as the Front for the Defense of the People of Ayacucho, has been around for over 60 years, maybe 70 years now, and it's one of the largest organizations in the country. It's one of the most important ones, specifically during what was called the internal armed conflict in the 80s and 90s. Was kind of ground zero for the massacres, the disappearances, the forced sterilizations, the counterinsurgency. It was brutal. So it's been one of the longest standing organizations in the country that's been involved, right, in organizing with the families of the martyrs in that region and nationally, regionally and nationally. Some of the, also some of the political parties that are, I guess, more on the left. I guess you might consider them more like social democratic parties that, are supportive of certain things, but then politically might miss the mark on certain things, or, just sometimes opportunism. But by politicians, but yeah, so that's kind of part of it, right? And again, unions as well. There's been I guess several months, maybe longer now. So there's been a long time crime spree, spike in violence. I've written a couple of times about it in Black Agenda Report, around just a spike in kidnappings, assassinations, honestly, a lot of things that similarly were happening during the Fujimori dictatorship that then ended up being that these were paramilitary groups that were being funded not just by the U.S. Embassy, by the dictatorship itself, by Fujimori, right? Like, and as we're seeing throughout the region, there is a quote unquote spike in violence, right? But oftentimes you see, you peek behind the hood a little bit, and it's actually, paramilitary groups that are armed and funded by either the internal, oftentimes both, right, working together, the local elites, as is the case with Haiti, right, in which the guns that are arming these so-called gangs are coming through ports that are owned by the elites, or and coming from Miami, or through the border with DR, right? And so there's quite a lot of I would say encirclement in the region. You feel it in the city. You feel it in the country, in the region, of Southcom encirclement, U.S. interference. People might not necessarily sort of understand it as that, right? And that is obviously the job of the organizations on the ground and the organizers to bridge those connections, right? But yeah, Peru is one of the most unequal countries in the world, right? The poverty rate has increased tremendously in the past couple of years, but even before that, right? And meanwhile, we're constantly featured as like the best food worldwide, and I will, that is a fact. But why, a wild percentage, I think it's 1 in 4 children are facing extreme poverty and hunger, in the country that has, some of the best, is known worldwide for its cuisine. And we can, the country is so lush and fertile, we can feed our own people. That's not the problem. But we're an export country, right? Whether it's to Lima or then internationally, right? We're not maintaining any of the resources, or the profits that come from those resources internally to then fund, education and infrastructure and hospitals, right? We're not, right. This government, this system, really, the constitution that was rammed through during the Fujimori dictatorship, which is why the system that he laid down quite literally is still outliving him. um, is because constitutionally made it, by law, had to privatize all our resources, right? So we don't profit from, any of the top, Peru ranks top in resources, and so many different kinds of resources, but we don't see any of the, what comes from that. We don't see any of the profits of that, and certainly not, and I live, in a rather, like, pituca, as they would call it, like pretty bougie neighborhood in Barranco, in Lima, right? But I'm originally from Barrios Altos, which is in the center of Lima and one of the poorest barrios, in the country, before we moved to Peru. And then, maybe this is when we get to the story of or to the main crux of the conversation around immigration. But yeah, like this is what forces, and I tell my story. I think a lot of folks tell their stories, as a way to make sense of these systems, right? People are forced to migrate because of U.S. meddling, because of 200 plus years of the Monroe Doctrine, right? Whether Biden calls it his front yard or every other president calls it the backyard, right? We are still seen as America for the Americans, and they mean that for the gringos, right? They don't mean that for the Native Americans who are also outside of the U.S., right? And throughout Turtle Island, we call, all of the Western Hemisphere Abya Yala, or as many revolutionaries have written on, Nuestra America, right? So that was a term written on by Jose Marti, by the late great Maurice Bishop, speaking on, making and needing to see the Caribbean as a zone of peace, right? There's been a long Bolivar, of course, right? Nuestra America, or La Patria Grande. So it's not just, and these Europeans came and made some lines, and now we have to abide by them. It's very strange. But until we actually are organized enough to defeat these systems, these structures of oppression and subjugation, this is what happens, right? So I don't know. Yeah, maybe this is where we can
No,
into immigration.
No, this was perfect, because what you ended with is exactly what I was sitting here thinking about, right? Like, some people will listen to what you say, what you talked about, like with the resistance in Peru and Lima, and say like, oh, well, they've been doing it for so long and they're still and not think on the other side, like, what would it look like without that resistance, right? Like, if you don't have those people organizing and fighting and providing aid and supporting communities and giving resources, like, then what are you left with, right? So I'm really glad that we took the time to invest in that conversation, because people need to understand the value in the organizing and the value in the resistance and the value in people actually fighting to make sure that there's a support system to set up to take care of each other. Because without that, we're totally lost. Like, for as bad as things are, they will be exponentially worse if you don't have at least that bit of radical tradition that lives, right?
Absolutely.
So I'll briefly explain that Cloud and I have multiple conversations on the BAP chat where we're just like putting laughing faces under what each other says, just because like the reality of this situation of people kind of responding to Trump's behavior with regard to immigration is so wild to me, not because it's not crazy what he's doing, right?
Right.
But because the reality is what he is doing is a continuation of the things that have always happened. So like, you know, my hashtag today is it only feels worse, right? Like like from the outside, if you're looking and you're watching the headlines and you're seeing the press conferences and all these things, like it may feel like, oh man, this thing is crazy, but there is literally nothing happening right now that has not been happening for a really long time. And so Cloud and I have multiple conversations and we're like, what? This is crazy. Like, this been happening. It's finally people are paying attention, and we feed off each other. And because of that, I was like, we got to get you on, because I need somebody who has the full-fledged organizing background experience. You literally live in a world right now that is all about resistance and fighting colonial occupation. And so we needed your voice, and we needed you to come in and really give a historical background of why what is happening right now is not as crazy as the media would want you to believe. And that doesn't mean it's not crazy. It means we need to understand how we got here and what the real fight is. Because the real fight, as I've said multiple times, is not about Donald Trump. It is about the system in which Donald Trump is able to continue to work within, because the system is what's fucked. It's not it's not really about whoever's sitting in the White House in this moment.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, you can start with how immigration in the U.S. starts under the Chinese Exclusion Act. I forget what exact year that is, but this is like way back in the historical vaults, right? You can start with the multiple programs, right? Whether it's the Bracero program, Operation Wetback, right? You're laying down a historical trajectory. I mean, again, the Monroe Doctrine lays out a sort of vision that sees the rest of the region, the global South. Yes, 1882. Thank you. You lay down this vision, right, to extract from the global South, right, and it's really against, right, no other Europeans, no other whites can come take our shit, right? This is ours. We fought for it, right? But so this particular conversation, again, right, you say it as you said, and folks have been saying, and I'm grateful for the folks that have been saying it, because it feels, you know, I don't know, there's a lot of activity and movement around the question of immigration, and of course cruelty, right? This is horrible what's happening, but again, as you say, it's been happening for decades, literally. And it's only gotten worse under Democrats, right? This particular sort of system of mass deportation, mass detention, and of course, who's profiting from that mass detention, right? It's Geo Group, it's all of these, you know, all other private military contractors, right? It's all going to like Virginia and right outside the, you know, DMV belt of those contractors, little mini mansions, right? That's where all that is going. For detaining people that are one, exercising a universal human right of movement, right, of migration, right. Everyone has the international human right to seek asylum, right. And what are folks seeking asylum from? Oftentimes, it is that the consequences of U.S. Western hegemony and imperialism in the region, right. Whether it's sanctions on Venezuelans, and that's why you have such an upsurge in the last several years of Venezuelan migrants in the U.S. It's because sanctions are tightening, right? People are struggling economically, right? And what are the points of sanctions? But not what is that not if not warfare by another name, right? Economic siege warfare, to try to make life so unattainable and so unbearable that the people themselves try to rise up against their government, right? And are using soft power mechanisms like U.S. aid, right? Or as they say here, USAID, to fund, Juan Guaido's, bandits, shadow governments, right? And to literally steal food from the mouths of the Venezuelan people who voted for, and not just voted, right? Again, and I think Venezuela is a prime example of how democracy is not just voting once every several years, right? One, they're organized around comunas, right? Literal like neighborhood communes. They're organized around at the city, at the regional, at the national level, whether it's around the political party itself or through, unions or associations of different kinds, right? But there are so many different elections. I think at least in the past 25 years, something well over 30, I want to say, maybe 31, 32 is going to come up, but they vote on all sorts of things, not just who the president is, but how they allocate their resources, right, to fund what needs the community has, right, very much from the bottom up, right. So anyway, all that to say is it's funny that the U.S. sanctions Venezuela because there's no democracy, but that is one of the most actually democratic societies, at least, in this part of the world. I live under a dictatorship, quite literally, but it's rubber stamped by the U.S. State Department, right? Antony Blinken sure made, like next day, you good, girl. Dina, you are our girl. But yeah.
It's crazy. It is crazy.
Yeah.
Jared, can you real quick, because I feel like so many people are unaware of the history of these immigration laws. So the video that Claudia sent from Vox is actually really well done and is a very concise, like, here's how we got here. And I don't want us to watch the whole thing, but if you start at the 2-minute mark, it really kind of clarifies like this one small thing that, like, in writing is like a small piece of the legislation, but totally changed everything with regard to how we treated people who came into the country.
This is great. Yeah.
And excuse me, and we'll have the link in the show description so people can watch the whole
And as
thing.
a disclaimer, I just did talk about soft power and NGOs and USAID, right? Vox is
right,
but this is actually a good of good journalism.
Right, we're not co-signing the source in all of its work. The fact that they got a little bit, just and if I can shout out to my comrade Sugar for voxunion.com, which predates Vox, and I feel like there was some chicanery. I feel a kind of way.
There usually is. I
feel a kind of way, but all right,
All right, so we'll run this till about 4:30, like 2.5 minutes.
All right.
Cool.
Drastically expanded deportable crimes to even minor infractions like shoplifting. It was also retroactive. So say it's 1976 and someone is caught stealing some albums from the mall. They wouldn't be deported. Over the next 20 years, they never commit another crime. But after 1996, they could be deported because of that old misdemeanor. And not just if they were currently undocumented. This applied to immigrants with lawful status too. And previously, an immigration judge could decide if the deportation should even take place. Now things were a little more automatic.
Ignoring the fact that those deportations would be extremely harmful to U.S. citizen children or to spouses.
Deportations skyrocketed, and IRA created the framework for future laws that further expanded reasons people could be deported, especially after 9/11. But IRA also made another huge fundamental change in the U.S. immigration system.
One of the aspects of the 1996 law that is particularly strict and I think in many respects inhumane is the so-called 3 and 10 year bars.
Those 3 and 10 year bars made these legal pathways nearly impossible to obtain. They work like this. Anyone who's been undocumented in the U.S. for 6 months and wants to gain legal status first has to leave the country and be barred from returning for 3 years. If they've been undocumented for more than a year, they're barred for 10 years. So if they want to get lawful status through a job, they first have to leave the U.S. for 10 years. Or through their brother, leave for 10 years. Or through their spouse, leave for 10 years.
It's family separation by another name. The bars were intended to try to essentially create punishments that were so severe to deter people essentially from coming here. But as we've seen with many other deterrence-based policies, that the practical effect is very different.
Instead, it incentivized people to stay in the U.S. undocumented. Before IRA, Mexican immigrants who came to the U.S. unlawfully were about 50% likely to return to Mexico within a year. But after 1996, more people started staying in the U.S. There were around 5 million undocumented immigrants living at the U.S. before IRA. Today, it's at least double that.
And we are somehow surprised by this outcome. This is of our own doing.
Laws like IRA shape the way the U.S. focuses on immigration.
So
yeah, my bad. I got wrapped up in it. But can I just say,
but that lays it out really.
It does.
But it's so obviously bullshit that you don't. First of all, you don't want people to be put out of the country. You want to keep them here, quote unquote, illegally, desperate. Without getting the benefit of full citizenship, but also providing the work and the taxes and the sales and doing all of that kind of stuff. You know, so it's and as you pointed out already, whenever you need to, you can just ratchet up the concern and use it for political purposes. I mean, it's just so.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and you know, I and Jackie spoke about this on the platform on her Darker Than Blue show episode a couple of weeks ago, right? Like, and Ricky says this all the time, the 90s are severely understudied. And this is one of those instances where neoliberalism was truly laid out and laid this foundation to mass incarcerate, to mass deport. And also, who do you think they are stopping? And, I did most of my organizing work since I was, I think maybe, when did I start? 17, so the past 20 years, has been around immigration. When I started organizing around the DREAM Act, I started organizing with youth in New York, and then around, hell, we started the coalition Ice Free NYC when Obama made the announcement in 2016 that he was going to heavily enforce and ratchet up detention numbers. And sure enough, January 2017 comes around like clockwork, right? So this is not new, and I think this is part of us as kikiing back and forth on the chat. Oftentimes, it's like, one, I think there is a level of opportunism in oftentimes like nonprofits and NGOs and shit, but other entities, right, that sort of see this like, oh, word, let's captivate around this. And I think, of course, you want to be where the masses are, right? But you don't want to tail the movement, right? You want to tap in with the folks that have been doing this, right? And so I'm just like, oh, interesting. I literally have never seen you in the 20 plus years I've been organizing around immigration in New York. But okay, bet. Let's see what you got. Cool. But your analysis starts at Trump? Oh, no.
Right.
So it's, you know, it's both like maddening and but also, of course, like a moment of deeper political engagement and education, right, and consciousness raising around one, these systems have been getting set up, right. The Clinton era, the 90s, truly just not only, you know, this immigration bill that again expands the deportable offenses. We used to joke around like, yo, you can't even jaywalk in this motherfucker. They're gonna kick you out the country. I can't even. And again, especially New York, who is being targeted by these petty offenses that then become deportable crimes, you know, years later? It's Africans, right? Whether it's Haitians or Jamaicans, right? That's who is being targeted. So I think that's another.
You mean the people who got the memo from per John Hope Bryant?
Right. And that's how I know these folks have not been out here, right? I'm like, you've not been in these streets. You've not been out here because it's been our folks, right? And I'm again, right, like this is all shade to the ADOS and FPA folks for dividing our people around this issue and more, right? But this is where that like American exceptionalism is not going to fucking save you, Negro.
Right.
Like we are, yeah. Anyway, so
right. So the other thing that I think is interesting, and I actually watched when Jackie did that. I had watched that episode before, so I was glad that you reminded me that she covered this piece. But something I don't know if people know, and I only know this because I am the crazy person who went in to read all of these things because I was writing about it. The 1994 crime bill is a predecessor to the 1996 bill, because in the 1994 crime bill, it indicates specifically that drug misdemeanors were going to be something that was a reason for deportation or failure to deport. You could jail people if they had a misdemeanor crime, drug offense, and didn't leave the country, right? Further, it was used to prevent people from coming back. So once you start putting all these things together, like, okay, so first we're going to criminalize like these real small drug offenses. And then we're going to set this rule that says if you have a real small drug offense, now we're going to go full force with immigration, right? So we can deport more people. And in the end, it's not really like you all said, in my opinion, about deportation. It's about jail, right? Because the money is in the surveillance. Yeah. The money is in the imprisonment. The money is in the encampment. Like the money is in the criminalization of people who are running from a situation caused by the U.S. in their own home countries. Like it is the wildest. It's wild. Yes.
It's a fucking racket game.
It's a racket.
I mean, it's a mafia. They run a fucking. This is The Sopranos lays out a lot, and you can see how these gangsters, these European gangsters, are moving, right? Not just within the borders of the whatever continental U.S., but through the region, through the world, right? They're gangsters and they're organized, but I don't know that our communities are. I mean, in fact, I know our communities are not enough to combat it, right? Especially if there are elements that are trying to impose risks on that by claiming that, you know, Africans are foundational to the U.S. Come on. Right. And yeah.
And when you understand how like the racket is so like when I made this connection between the 94 crime bill, the 96 crime bill, what's happening now, and realize like this was an excuse for them to build more jails and to, you know what I mean? Like
the 94 bill too, right?
Right. And
the Telecommunications Act as well, because that's the media portion of it, right?
Absolutely. Right? And so you see how everything is about creating systems that will again create profits for those 1% of people who are profiting off of the misery of everybody else. And so this idea that as a community, we're going to turn on the community member who migrated here from somewhere else because they're quote unquote taking our jobs, that like it is like sometimes I just want to like slap people like wake up, like don't you understand that this is a setup? It's a setup,
So
and you just fell right into the trap.
so part of, I just wanted to add on to the grandness of it all, because a lot of this, to the point you all were making, and they're right, when Jackie and Ricky and others point out the importance of the 90s to all of this. Just to connect dots, folks need to, is the whole NAFTA and CAFTA thing that Clinton presided over too, which destroyed democracy's ability, to the extent they exist, to override the corporate interests continental wide. So, I mean, they literally had, I remember reading at the time, Chapter 11, in part because I went through a bankruptcy, right? So I was reading about bankruptcies, and I happened to end up connecting it to this chapter, which in the United States, Chapter 11 is often associated with bankruptcy. But there's a Chapter 11 in the NAFTA thing that said if a country passes democratically a law that impacts negatively the profits of any of the corporations involved in this agreement, they can take it to a court, a private court, under Chapter 11 and sue those governments for lost profits. So I was like, I'm sitting here. Oh, I'm sure. I'm just but to the last point, Renee, you're making that they make it democratically impossible for people in their independent countries to protect themselves. They impose tariffs and all these other policies that almost demand that people risk their lives just to get here, so-called illegally or legally. And then they play this game with the people who do get here. And then, through the last point about this whole media, then they can tell us the stories to pit black and brown and poor and whoever against one another. So it's like it becomes almost impossible to think that people could get it right. So, like, it's not, like the struggle just becomes that much, because then the people coming here, in the process of their struggle, they're not awakened with a deep political radical consciousness to what's been going on here. So then they can also be put into susceptible conditions and behavior. I mean, so it becomes like, So anyway, I just wanted to add that on there.
Reactionary, when there's no sort of, political understanding. And again, right, then that's the job of organizers to step in, make, touch base, make contact, right? Have those conversations around connecting the dots, right? Because people might not, know the big words. And this is not to say don't read. Please do. Beloveds, please do read, in fact.
You just don't read, beloved.
Yeah. Always shout out to Hiram. And also Hiram talks a lot about the capture of nonprofits, right? And that also goes into a lot of the stuff that's happening now, where there is this heightened consciousness, which is good, but then that there is this level of opportunism and what happened, really capture, where folks are kind of chasing funding, and as soon as it's out of the news cycle, it's like that Toy Story scene where it's like, I'm done playing with you now. But these are people's lives, right? And that's
I'm mad.
the
I know what you're talking about too, by the way.
Yeah. And that's the difference between organization and mobilization, right? Organization is permanent. And that's what we are trying to build, right? Organized communities, organized, pockets of resistance, and to be able to set ourselves up to actually, defend communities. I wish I knew more about the coalition, but I know that BAP SoCal just joined, I think, maybe over 50 organizations in LA in the region, around like a community defense coalition, right? Understanding these connections, right? And then again, there's been longstanding organizations that have been doing this work, and some nonprofits. You know, I will, like, I got a lot of my political education, especially starting off through, you know, Families for Freedom, which is a nonprofit but does excellent work, right? A lot of the resources that I still cite often have to do with them and them really building that connection, or making that point and connecting that dot, that the intersection between the criminal justice system and the immigration system is what targets Black migrant communities, right? So again, being in New York, we were always on the ground in like Flatbush, in, you know, Flushing, and etc. In the South Bronx, right? Like organizing with Africans throughout the diaspora. What, like, to me, and oftentimes even before I thought or even identified as a revolutionary Pan-Africanist, I was doing that work, right? Because these are the connections to be made. And yeah, so that that organization still does a lot of really good work. They have like Know Your Rights workshops and such, and have like a hotline with inside detention centers, I think several. Baji, Black Alliance for Just Immigration, that does also really good work. And one of the organizers there, Abe, that used to work at Families for Freedom, a really good comrade, a Eritrean comrade, that did this, used to lead these 6-month speaker bureaus that really went into really meaty class of going through that history of immigration law. The 90s, we focused a real long time on that, on the, not just the ARERA bill, but everything that happened, because they set up a system, right? And we're seeing, right, the effects of that, but it's been happening. And I mean, Obama wasn't called the deporter in chief for nothing, right? Trump didn't increase the deportation numbers more than Trump for nothing, right? This is not, you know, the late great Glenn Ford, and I will always say is one of my deepest regrets, having hopped on to bar after his passing. But, you know, always to quote the late great Glenn Ford, the Democrats are just a more effective evil. And we see that in multiple ways, right? So immigration is one of the ways that you can really see that. Yeah.
So I'm glad you actually brought up some of the organizations, because this is something that's on my list for you to also like kind of cover. One, the report that you sent from the org that you just mentioned, and I just remember there's a J. Blanket, yes. Where they covered a lot of the information. There's some like hair raising numbers and stats in that report, including the $535 million on border security technology. It's right, the eyebrows, right? So like, can we talk a little bit about the two orgs that you mentioned specifically that you're really familiar with? Because I think one of the problems that I see a lot is that people just don't know that the work has been happening. And so you have these orgs and nonprofits and people who pop up because it's Trump and then disappear when it's not Trump. And then people don't know who do you go to as like reliable resources for the organizing work. But Jared, you also took your mic off. So did you have something to add?
I was just going to ask. No. I was going to ask if you were talking about the one of the reports in the link Clau sent us.
Yes.
So is that the racial discrimination against Black migrants? Okay,
that's the one.
All right.
And this is a really good, I guess, resource and tool to maybe educate, right, and sort of use to galvanize our folks, right, that this is not a separate issue, right? This, like, I will always scream it from the rooftops. immigration is an African issue. It has to deal with us. One, because oftentimes it is Africans that is, whether it's from the continent, whether it's from the Caribbean, whether it's from Latin America, right? And myself, Afro-Indigenous, of different indigenous groups. But yeah, I mean, it affects us. And also, I mean, shoot, did we not learn, right? Like we're continuing the legacy. I mean, this is why I'm in an organization, right? We're continuing the legacy of the work that's already been done on the Black radical peace tradition that understands that these are systems that are affecting us in similar ways, not just because some of us are from, I guess, make up both, can check off both boxes, but because these are the same systems, whether it's through, as you mentioned, Renee, through the surveillance and the technology of it all, and the subcontractors and contractors of it all, right? That go to pave those tree-lined streets out in the outside in the Virginia area, right outside of the immediate DMV area, where it's yeah. So this is a system that they have laid out for decades, and again, I think it's a good thing, right, to galvanize around where folks are at, right? But it's not just reacting, right? That's not what organizing is, right? It is being able to lay out that foundation of of connecting the dots, of understanding why we need to be organizing and building structures of with principles of unity, right? With a coherent, political line and ideology, yeah, and just touching pavement, right? Like just talk to folks, and those are really uncomfortable conversations oftentimes when the media is so just batshit crazy, and there are definitely anti-migrant fears, but yeah, I mean, you have to find ways of breaking through that propaganda, right? One, by being organized ourselves and creating that counter propaganda, and understanding again, right, that us calling for community control does also mean, right, being able to defend that community, and our neighbors, whether they have papers or not, right, and just as we would with anyone that, I don't know, I think about, right, cousins on parole, right? Like, I'm not gonna let I would put my body on the line for before someone is taking away my family, right? And right, sending them off to detention centers for years, right? Because every day is more money. Every bed filled per day is more money in the pockets of these contractors, of these military contractors, of these, surveillance contractors, whatever, the case is. This is, I mean, it very much mirrors the prison industrial complex, right? In that way, where it's just keep those beds filled, right? We need numbers, we need free labor, right? We need to put out those fires in Cali. It's not going to happen without, prison slave labor.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about Families for Freedom specifically? Jared's doing the head shake.
No, my bad.
Go.
As you were talking, I just I was just quickly Googling, because I was like, who? Because it said there Biden gave $535 million to border security surveillance. And then I was like, well, who does that money go to? And then
Palantir, yeah, I think there was a graphic that I sent too, but
yeah. Well, which I didn't even think to look at. Well, I didn't see Palantir yet, but I was just looking up. One of the main contractors is now I can't even remember the name, but they're owned by Cognizant Technology at the end. And then I was like, so who owns that? And it's the same. It's BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. So I don't even have the names yet, but it's like all the same private equity groups that do own media, Google and Alphabet itself, that own everything. They're
The
basically
enemy is well organized.
I'm like, damn. But
We are
let me get to this graph that you sent. But sorry, Renee, I was just playing catch up. I'm like,
no, you couldn't. So while Jared's pulling that up, can you talk a little bit about the org? Well, you know what? Before you do that, let's talk about the graphic, because this is crazy to me, and it's directly linked to the report that we mentioned with regard to like who is making money off of this process.
Of course, yeah.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
the typical
DevTech, Palantir, Falcon,
Amazon's
cloud based.
Yeah, and who owns Amazon? And what media does he own also, right? Washington Post is not gonna,
Right.
But yeah, so this is some of the work and resources that organizations like Families for Freedom have been putting out there. But I know that they also I haven't tapped in with them in a while. But I know that they've been doing accompaniment for decades, probably since it was started. I forget exactly when it was started now, but yeah, they do real on the ground work when it comes to supporting. Again, I think they have a couple of hotlines in detention centers throughout the country, so folks that are caught up are able to, give them a call and organize around whether it's legal support, whether it's organizing, their family members and communities around, doing check-ins, because you also have to do, I forget exactly, I don't think it's monthly, but, every so often have to do ICE check-ins, right? And all these points of contacts are potential opportunities where they can nab you, right? Or organized communities, again, right, is one way that you can try to make sure that your folks are not caught up, right? So when I spoke before, right, Families for Freedom had, I'm not sure if they still do their 6-month Speakers Bureau classes. I hope they do, because they're phenomenal from what I remember. But a lot of those folks that came out of at least when I was my cohort, right, then started organizing in a coalition. ICE Free NYC came from that. And again, I think I mentioned before, it was when Obama made the announcement that he was going to ratchet up detentions and deportations, and sure did. So we were, doing a lot of New rights workshops, whether it was in churches and laundromats, like all over New York, doing legal clinics and supporting other organizations and some nonprofits and orgs that were doing legal clinics with the help of like NYU law students, for example. The New Sanctuary Coalition was doing some of that more legal work. And from that, then, some more, I guess, some friends would call it spicy actions against detention centers, where folks were like locking arms. And then from there came some organizing around rapid response networks. And I did that organizing with some of those folks for about 4 years, very specific to Brooklyn. But we had also managed to get like a national coalition, or not coalition, but national relationship with the UU churches, and being able to sort of map out a network of underground sanctuaries, should folks need it. And yeah, I mean, and the sanctuary movement really starts in the 80s, right? This is good old Reagan, right? So that
he died during my wedding.
That's right.
You know,
Cheers.
cheers. Salute.
Yeah.
Salute.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So this is, work that there's a legacy to it, right? Even I think, I don't know when it was. It must have been maybe like a day or two after January 20th. So maybe it was the 22nd or 23rd. There was what was put out on social media as a general strike, day without immigrants. And one, I thought it was funny because I was like, we did this in 2006, quite literally, and we did get out millions of people, both in LA and New York. I think in New York was maybe like 500,000 we had out there, and the LA definitely beat the shit out of us in organizing those more numbers out there. But this is LA. But yeah, we did that, right? There had been, again, I think that I appreciate when there's urgency. And I think it's, again, the job of organizers and organizations to be there to make those connections, to make, connect the dots, to sort of lay a historical background and context, not just to the situation of like the immigration system, but then what has resistance to that looked like, and where can we plug in, right? How does this this moment, right, actually build towards more unity on not just in the local level but at the regional level, right? If I can do a major plug for the work that we're doing down here in Black Alliance for Peace with the Zone of Peace campaign. But we are launching the public mass structure of the Zone of Peace campaign on the 21st, which is both the day of they assassinated Malcolm and Sandino, obviously different years, right? But really hearkening and laying the foundation of our revolutionary leaders, right? And sort of proclaiming that legacy as continuing that work of unifying Nuestra America under a Black radical peace tradition with the legacy that's already been laid down. Again, Morris Bishop has written about the Caribbean being seen as a zone of peace. Jose Marti literally began, the Cuban revolutionary Jose Marti first in talking about Nuestra America and La Patria Grande, right? Understanding that internal and external colonialism and imperialism are affecting all of us, right? And so therefore this struggle isn't just localized, it must be international. There's no way this beast is going down without some strategic and principled unity. The enemy is very organized, right? And we are not as organized. And so therefore we are at a moment where we do need to be even more, coordinated around anti-militarist, anti-imperialist, struggle. And so the U.S. NATO out of our Americas network is the public, again, mass structure of this campaign that is going to carry forward the demands, right? Dismantling Southcom bases throughout the region, return Guantanamo to Cuba, right? And Guantanamo currently is a point of contention around this topic, right? But again, this is not the first time Guantanamo has been used to detain migrants. Good old Bill Clinton, again, and Bush Sr. Were using Guantanamo to detain Haitian migrants in the 90s, right? And as Dr. Jemima Pierre, another one of our co-coordinators in the Haiti Americas team and BAT member, always says, right, and she talks about this and writes about this, Haiti is a laboratory for empire. It sure is. And so we see how, one, the narrative around gang violence that they have in Haiti to justify, the MSS, Kenyan-led MSS mission, but U.S. funded, of course. They're trying to make that a UN peacekeeping mission yet again, right? But they don't talk about who's funding those gangs. Haiti doesn't make weapons. They don't manufacture weapons. Where's it coming from, right? These privately owned, elite-owned ports owned by Zionists, right? Haiti's wealthiest man, BGO, is a straight up Israeli Zionist. These issues are interconnected. This is, you know, a lot of the bullets and the weapons used here in Peru against, you know, indigenous campesinos were manufactured in Israel, right? Some of these exploding bullets are the same I remember hearing about back in Operation Cast Lead, right, in 2008. So when they say battleground tested, meaning they tested it on Palestinians, they really mean it, right? And they export this you know, gangsterism, this violence, and the system throughout the world, right? I mean, shoot, Chavez used to call Colombia the Israel of Latin America, and that was for good reason, right? Until recently, it was, you know, basically, yeah, for Israel over here. And, you know, Petro, even though there are some contradictions with Petro and social democrats in general, has still been a thorn on the side of U.S. imperialism, even with whatever concessions he's made, right? And concessions, unsurprisingly, around Haiti, because, you know, again, as Dr. Pierre says, the leftism of the Americas dies at the doorstep of Haitian sovereignty, right? So that's how you can have a quote unquote leftist Lula leading the 2004 invasion of the U.S. under the core group, right? And continuing to be a member of the core group, which is this completely unelected body made up of the U.S., Canada, France, right, among others, that dictate Haitian politics, and assign, you know, quote unquote presidents that nobody voted for. And so, yeah, you see that the system is laid out, and you know, as I was saying before, the U.S. And NATO are militarizing the Pacific Ocean, right? They're trying to ready the battlefield for a war with China that they know is upcoming, that we can't win, but it's, you know, they're still gonna go out, you know, trying. And so, yeah, it is the duty of you know, revolutionaries, organizers, to make those connections, to organize their communities around that, right? And when we say solidarity, right, it's, and you know, we'll have like days of action in solidarity with Haiti, for example. Of course, it's to be in solidarity with folks there, and it's also to understand how those similar conditions affect your neighborhood, right? Like your streets, right? And that's what folks mean when they're saying internationalizing the struggle, right? So this network, the U.S. NATO Out of Our Americas network, is to provide a platform to be able to connect all of these struggles, not just in the global north, but in the global south, and to really build these equal relationships, right? Of course, with no gringo chauvinism, right? No USian chauvinism, but I think understanding that we have to be united in this struggle.
Yeah, I agree. Jared, do you have any notes? I have more questions. You know, I always have more.
Oh yeah, no, go ahead. I'll get in where I fit in. I'm good. Go ahead.
So one thing, and this is just a general part of what I always like to do when we have actual like organizers on, right? So can you talk to people about what they should be looking for? Because what the questions that we get a lot are like, well, how do I know where to plug in? How do I figure out where to go? How do I figure out what to do? And for me, a lot of it is just like, I don't know, like look around. Like when you're somewhere and you see somebody doing something, instead of just walking past them and telling them you don't want their flyer, maybe like stop and ask them like what they're doing and what the organization is about. But can you talk a little bit about like just what some thoughts about like how people can get involved in things that they consider, maybe tell you a story about getting involved with that, like whatever, however you want to couch it. But I feel like this is something that we don't like we just don't get a whole lot of focus on, like, how do people engage and find access points if they're interested in actually being on the ground? Like, how do they plug in?
Yeah, yeah, and I will do a big shout out to Dr. CBS, also a BAT member, who's written a great piece on just this, right? On joining organizations. And I believe there's multiple pieces on Hood Communist as well. I know Erica's written on this, but I mean, first, right, join an organization, right? Just understand. I think if people are at the level of outrage and you know, it's outrageous, and also it's not new, and it's not dire, if that makes sense, right? Like I said, there's the sanctuary movement itself, you know, has been going on for decades, right? Priests and nuns were getting you know, years and felony charges, right, for you know, hiding and you know, aiding and abetting, whatever. But yeah, I would say join an organization, and I think that means, right, exactly, scoping out your local area, right? Hit the streets, hit the mud, right? Talk to people, talk to your community. More than anything, I think, and I think also, I will also shout out Erica, who often says, right, like, what if we changed communities, the word communities, to neighborhood, right? And now talk about organizing, right? So organize your neighborhood, right? Talk to your neighbors, right? Because oftentimes there's these like very superfluous meanings of community, right? Like, I'm in queer community, I'm in XYZ community, but it's very internet oriented often, right? So again, right, like, hit the streets, talk to your folks, talk to your neighbors. And yeah, see who is out there, who is doing work, because I guarantee you there are folks doing work around this, whether it's, you know, local tenant union, right? Especially if you're out in the West, in LA, right? The now their name is escaping me, but one of the major Unión El Barrio, I think, right? So just, yeah, organizations and folks that have been doing work, whether it's around, and I'm not even saying just political parties or nonprofits, or maybe just networks and affinity groups of or coalitions, right? But people that are out there, yeah, engaging community, doing, you know, not just I guess know your rights workshops, which again I think are important, and you know, mutual aid, right? But oftentimes I think, especially that word gets that is the organizing, without, you know, having a program to back up why you are doing these, right? It is like, this is a tool that is used as a program. It's not the entire organization, right? So what is the program that there is a programmatic value to having certain things, right? But I think that this is, you know, conversations that people have in their organizations with their comrades. Ideally, if you are organizing in a scientific way, right, where you are thinking about what, you know, what are the objectives that we are trying to, you know, move on and around a principled unity, right? Not just, I think, again, I think it's great to see that people are activated, right? But I do think that there needs to be some organization around that. And yeah, look to the folks that have been doing the work, right? If you're in New York, I mean, I know a million organizations in Queens, right? Queens Neighborhoods United, right? But that have been doing work literally since I started, right? Like, I know some of those folks from the New York State Youth Leadership Council from back in 2005, I think, when I joined. So yeah, folks have been out here, you know, and yeah, but have those conversations. Yeah.
Thank you, Jared.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. So one thing. So first of all, there's a couple of you mentioned her name. I just assigned my students to watch. I can't remember the title of it, but it was Dr. CBS giving was it the Dr. King? It was something at Georgetown where she gave and it was really dope too. My memory is just fading here, but and Orasami Burton was in the Q&A discussion with her, so it was really good.
Yeah.
And then that led me to Burton, Attica, tip of the spear, the redefinition of race among the prisoners in Attica, who redefined what it meant to be Black, led me back in my thought pattern to my own classroom, where we have diaspora wars at times, and a lot of confusion around these issues in particular. So I did think to ask you, given your background, how and where you grew up, your politics, in some ways you've answered this already, but do you have a stylized approach when in talking specifically to not yet organized, not yet politically educated young Latinos, Black folks from the diaspora, in trying to connect some of the dots that I made a reference to earlier? That is, people in their immediate struggles not being made fully aware even of their own histories, never mind the histories of other people in other parts of the world, and then come into contact and not always getting to the best of terms, and in today's moment being encouraged to be pulled apart in ways. I mean, even as I'm looking at, and this came up in my class last week, even in the way that like, on the one hand, I want Fat Joe to get dragged, but not because he's saying Latinos built hip hop and can say the N-word, and like, that's not why I want you to get dragged. There's so many other better reasons for that. Like, but and forgetting the moments maybe where Big Pun makes reference to being Taino and Black and I'm proud. Like my point, I don't know. So I don't really know where I'm going with that. But in other words, just to say, like, I'm a little bit concerned. So it's always good to hear from folks like you and people doing this organizational work. And I just thought I'd ask for a very pointed, if you know.
Yeah. I mean, and who is it? Rafiki Morris that says this, right? Like, oh, you think you're an organizer? Come back after you've had 200 conversations of the same conversation and you've like actually refined it, right? Like, how have you been engaging your community, right? At the, starter, and starting off, folks that are starting off and, are just immersed in this reactionary propaganda because it serves the telecommunication companies that are also own the companies that are detaining and deporting on migrants and caging our folks to, whether it's in the prison industrial complex or the detention centers, right? So I think it depends, right? Who is my audience, I guess. But oftentimes I'll say, well, my experience, and it's true, right? Like, it's mostly based in New York. And in New York, it's mostly Africans that are being targeted. So it is an issue. It is an African issue, right? Like, it is mostly Haitians. It is mostly Jamaican, what have you, right? I mean, but I guess it also depends, right? If you go to Sunset Park, it's mostly not limited to, not exclusive to, right? But oftentimes, like, Mexicans, right? But it's varied, right? So I think one, being able to say, well, it does affect our people and here's how. And also saying, right, like, well, just even historically, right, like, more Africans got dropped off in South America than in North America, right? Like, we were spread out all throughout. And it's just a matter of where, the boat dropped you off. So I think, but yeah, I mean, again, it's a conversation, right? Like back and forth, and like, all right, what are they giving me back? That what can I use of like, what are they saying that where I can be like making that connection? Like, oh, well, you said just this right now, right? Well, this is how this relates to this, right? But
Yeah,
yeah,
no, yeah.
it's
Yeah, no, I
difficult.
get it.
It's really
Yeah.
difficult. It's really
No, and I get, so when I get, obviously every semester a new group of young students, and for 20 some years now, it's been the same. There's been no advance from the kinds of questions that come in, and the points of departure for the students is not getting elevated, has not been elevated over this time. And I feel like it's in many ways getting dragged back down, and even stuff that I thought, again, that I could take for granted, Michael Jordan's the best basketball player ever, you know what I mean? The diaspora made hip hop, everything's up for grabs nowadays.
You had to
Nowadays,
find
everything's up for grabs. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
people just say the wildest stuff now. So I don't know.
When people first started saying that, started claiming that reggaeton didn't start from El General, and you know this as a Panamanian in a household with you, right? Like, I'm
People
sorry.
it got a little heated.
Are we rewriting history now?
That's a good point. People was getting a little heated. Like that's
Right?
a very good example.
Evie Queen did that. I thought that was Panama. Okay.
But this is what happens, though, right? Like, and I think as I watch how things like transpire, like sometimes I just sit back and I'm like, what the fuck? Like, what just happened? What did I just see? And how exactly? Like it's like me sitting down and writing a 1,200 word essay on why the Super Bowl halftime show can never be revolutionary, right?
Well,
like
that's counterinsurgency, though, right? Those displays of counterinsurgency into right. I think this is I'll forever be a hater of Afro-pessimism, but this is why, right? Like. We can't organize if everyone's anti-Black. We can't organize coalitions if that's the case, right? We can't organize around deeper issues of systemic, right, contradictions if everyone is anti-Black, and similarly, right, forever be quoting my comrades, but Erica has written such a wonderful piece around identity reductionism, right? Shout out to her for really raising that as a concept and framework of we really lose sight of the politics, right? When we just say like, well, my experience as XYZ is why this matters, right? It's like, well, what's your class, right? So when people say like, well, listen to, Bolivians, right? Like, I was talking to my Bolivian friend about Evo, and okay, well, is your Bolivian friend white from the bougie Santa Cruz neighborhood? No, I thought so. Yeah. Right. So this is where these sort of shallow, I think, maybe analysis is, fails us. So yeah,
it's funny that you bring that up because we talked about Sky Full of Elephants last week on the show. Well, last week for people watching right now, because technically it's Saturday, right now it's Tuesday. And the one thing we did not talk about, which I mentioned to Jared when I was like, okay, after you read this book, was Afro-pessimism, because I think I probably have a slightly different take on it than what Cloud just said, not because it's not about being told, because I think, and maybe I just read it when I was reading, but I took it more as fight now, but don't forget that there's this inherent anti-Blackness that exists everywhere. So after we're fighting, make sure we circle back to that topic to clarify. Now, I have not done extensive reading on Afro-pessimism, so this is not coming from someone who is a scholar in it or anything.
And neither have most of the critics.
Right.
And that's why I keep saying you are right, Renee. And this is a blind spot with some of our dear comrades. But it's
Look,
all good.
I ain't trying to start no beef. It's
all good. It's all good.
But I just,
disagreement is just it's not a
absolutely.
thing.
But I just, I think all of this also, there's so many things, and I think that's part of the problem, right? Like, if you talk to the ADOS people, I'm the problem, right? Like me with my immigrant parents and, blah, 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 and this whole thing.
Right.
And like, there's so many different forces that are pushing in to try and convince us about what the problem is, when the reality is the problem is really simple. It's fucking capitalism. Like, that's the problem, right? Like, that's the problem. The problem is capitalism.
Yeah. Or,
right?
Imperialism, and then,
right.
Take it up where Nkrumah took it, neocolonialism, right? These are the maxims.
And all of them feed each other, right? They're all feeding each other and keeping the systems going, that because we're so busy fighting about, well, this is what we should focus on, and this is what we should focus on, and this is who the issue is, and that we're never actually focused on the things that we should be talking, which was my issue with the halftime show, right? Like, everybody was all impressed with like the fake human flag and whatever, and I'm like, did y'all listen to the words of the song? Because like, when you pull up the lyrics, there is nothing at all within the lyrics of that song that have anything to do with revolution. And like, y'all want me to be excited because Serena Williams is like crip walking in the corner, and she's crip walking to a song where he is blatantly misogynist, like blatantly sexist, like blatantly saying words about people that, like, when anybody else says it, they're like freaking out, like, oh, you can't use that word. Like, when did this start being about pageantry and not paying attention to what the actual like message is and who the messenger is, right? Like, you're standing on television at a Super Bowl halftime show wearing $1.2 million worth of diamonds, $1,200 tight jeans, a jacket that was so expensive I couldn't even track how much money he spent on it, and you're standing there telling people to be humble. Are we serious right now? Like,
and to be clear, that in that sense, I fully agree with the critique of identity reductionism, which is what was on display during that Super Bowl. I just don't think Frank is doing that. That's all I'm saying in terms of Afro-pessimism. I just don't think that's what he's doing. But I agree with the critique that identity reductionism is a major problem and allows us to see a Super Bowl performance and be like, ooh,
like, ooh, look at him.
We're winning.
He split the flag. Did he split the flag, or was he the remaining thread holding the flag together? Which one?
Even in Veep, they clarify and have a whole scene around literally a $1,200 crate that she wanted to stand on to be seen as being a spokesperson for the people. And even her crew was like, you can't be on a $1,200 crate talking about you're for the people. Even on a silly show like that, but in real life, we get it thrown in our face, these $1,200 flared leggings. I was like, you gotta be kidding.
Yeah.
And it's so yeah, yeah.
But the Sudan and Palestine flag were thrown up. So
tackle him and get him out of
here.
Right.
Right. And that wasn't him, right? But
no. And like and the blatant miss that like the NFL quickly sent out a statement apologizing for the protests that nobody saw, because unless you were there, right, they made sure that the person was not on camera at any time. So they were very clear to make sure that he did not get the whole spectacle, because they made sure not to point any cameras at him. And the NFL quickly sent out a notification that they didn't have anything to do with it, and he was part of the show, and they had no idea, and but they ain't make no complaint about Kendrick Lamar's performance. So that tells you everything, right? Like, they didn't apologize for any part of his performance. They didn't question it. They didn't send anything
and
out.
it would
Like,
have been revolutionary if he had stopped the show and said, "Get your hands off my
right,
dancer, put
right,
the flags
Something.
back up."
Stump
that
anything, right?
I might have
Yeah,
even
but-
been like, "All right, Kendrick."
Yeah, but this is why we can't rely on celebrities for
No,
our analysis
no.
or commentary. It's
Right, and even the protester
contradiction.
right, and the protester in an interview, and I think I read this in The Intercept, was like, I was listening to him like talking while he was, while we were practicing, and it gave, like, this is where he got the idea from, right? Was like this whole
right.
The revolution is going to be televised. So I understand like this, right? So that little bit like sparked something, and I'm not mad at that part. But what I don't want is for people to confuse. Like what the dancer did was revolutionary. What Kendrick Lamar did was not revolutionary, right?
So, yeah. And again, right, to always say, right, the 90s are severely understudied. This is to think that one person is right, that this individual act is an act of revolution when it's, again, an individual act, right? Or to think that one celebrity is going to be like set out a manifesto, or that this is individualism to the max, and not, like, what are we doing? What are we doing?
Right. And it's infuriating. Like,
Diddy emerged in the 90s only to tell us to vote or die. So another reason we need to understand the 90s and celebrity and all
honestly,
of that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wrong.
I mean, and really, I mean, separately, I have been arguing that I've really, that is a good point about the 90s, because said differently, I've been arguing that the so-called golden era of hip hop, just to make another reference, which was supposed to have been in the 90s, and all of this, we were watching in real time the colonization and collapse of what could have been a revealing enterprise or cultural expression, and championing it. And I'm guilty. Like, I was, so so in that way, I try to be humble, shout out to, and remember that it can be sometimes difficult to see as it's happening. There are, and especially I think today, and why the work that you and your comrades are doing is so important, is that especially today, I think it's even more difficult to recognize these differences. The one you just even point out there between the dancer and Kendrick. By the way, has Kendrick come out and said anything about that?
No. Hell no. But he didn't say anything before about it either. So like, like, I wouldn't have expected him to be like, yo, let my dancer go, because he has paid no attention to what's happening in the Sudan or in Palestine or in anywhere else. Like, that's not his role, right? And
isn't one of the labels owned by a Zionist? One of the labels he's on?
Oh, all of them.
Yeah, exactly.
All of them.
Yeah. So,
right?
I mean, including the Amazon thing he did with the concert,
Right. Plus, the halftime show. I mean, the Super Bowl is just a giant, however many hours. Military, exactly. So, was it a revolutionary act, Kendrick?
Right. Like, can you actually have a revolutionary act on a stage that is being provided by an entity that is literally surviving on capitalism, militarism? Like you can't. It's antithetical. You cannot do it, period. Right. And if they allow you space on that stage, it's because they know you're not going to do it. Right. They're not putting nobody up there who's actually going to engage regular people in the thought that they should be revolutionary. Like, they're not doing that. right? And Kendrick Lamar is not doing it either. Why? Because you can't buy $1.2 million worth of diamonds if you are talking about revolution, because the revolution is going to end every access to that, right? Like, it's not possible, right? So while everybody's like, oh, what he said, in my article, I list a number of words he didn't say. Guess what? He didn't say immigration. He didn't say housing. He didn't say unemployment.
The icy reference was on his neck.
Right. Like, he doesn't say any of the stuff that is actually about what people need to pay attention to if we're going to engage people in a real conversation about revolution.
Yeah,
so,
he didn't even talk about the material conditions of Compton.
No. He talked
Mm.
about being from Compton and how he's gonna kill people.
And they said Serena's Crip Walk was a tribute to her being from Compton. And I'm like, and again, I know, and I don't know, but I'm sure someone from Compton was watching that thinking, what does this benefit me? How does, like, if you really want to do something for Compton, I got a whole plan for you. I got a whole list of things that Serena, Kendrick, etc., and so forth could be advocating. Including, it just occurred to me, wasn't one of the things that Tupac was doing at the end of his life was promising to do free concerts in the hood as a way to break the back of the industry and the mechanisms that keep art from artists and artists from their people and all this. That would be beautiful. It's in today's, especially given what I just shared with you yesterday, Renee, me trying to get to this D'Angelo show and only to find out that so this is perfect, Clau. I get it. I put out the word. I want to see D'Angelo wherever he's playing. He's going to be at the Roots Festival thing in Philly in a couple months, and the tickets went on sale today being February 18th. And but it seems like a bait and switch, because first of all, it's run by Chase Bank. Live Nation, which is owned by John C. Malone, the original funder of the original BET, supposedly Black Entertainment Television. It's and the ticket prices start at $200 and go up to $1,200-$1,300. So and they don't tell you when D'Angelo's playing. How long is this set going to be? That's the real crime. And then I'm gonna have to sit through 30. And I can't, so I don't. I'm gonna have to.
Oh, wow.
The real point of the story is that Jared's probably not gonna be able to do it because I can't spend all that kind of money to sit there for 3 days in the hopes of seeing D'Angelo for 15 minutes. So and then it's like, but the whole point, the whole real point is that if you really wanted to be doing something, these are the kinds of what Pac was suggesting in that moment would be a great blueprint for today to get the Chase Banks and the Live Nations out of the whole process. Why are you $1,200 to see a show?
That's wild. That's wild.
It's wild. It's wild. And as you're saying that, it's like it's occurring to me that all is wild. That this stuff is even more insidious because I'm realizing like Serena Williams has been elevated as like this presentation of like how awful medical support is for Black women during pregnancy, during childbirth, all these things, right? So she's supposed to be this bastion for Black women, and you were on stage crip walking for freaking Kendrick Lamar as he's talking absolute nonsense in the lyrics of his song. Like, can you just be any like like how does this happen? I don't even understand. And there's like articles about her basically clarifying like, oh, I did it because he asked me to. There is actual video out there talking about this is the moment when Serena was about to go out and change the world because she was walking. Yes, she's walking out on stage to crip walk. Like this is the insidiousness. Right?
Listen,
Right.
but seriously, we looked at it. We in the similar text. There's Eyes on the Prize 3 is coming, brought to us by the deliverer of Luther, and HBO. The preview alone is just. I mean, we'll maybe pick this up next week or whenever. But the preview alone, I mean, this is the time where that exact description of radicalism is being encouraged. That something slightly less maybe performative than Serena Williams is being presented as this is the pinnacle of what of the continuity of a Black liberation struggle in the United States, and but rebranded in such a way that the work that is being represented here today, that we often try to represent more broadly in these spaces, is made to look even more anachronistic and crazy and the lunatic left and all of that. So because I know we have to head towards a close here, but I just, as we do, want to again commend you for your work here, and wherever all around the world, and and the your comrades and our comrades and all of that. Big salute to everything you all are doing, because it is. Woo! It is looking rough out here, and the sophistication of the messaging is intensifying. So again, just thank you for everything.
Yeah. No, I think thank you. And then I think this is also, again, right, the one of the effects of the Telecommunications Act, right, of making that propaganda so much louder. But I also have faith, in the people, right? Some of the comrades in the party, in APRP, right? We say dare to have as much faith in your own people as you do in other systems in the government, right? I mean, just look at the youth in LA right now, right? Out on the streets before that, and a lot of these youth are some of the same ones that were involved in the encampments around Palestine. Right. I think at an international level, the contradictions are heightening ever so. And it provides a lot of opportunity for that political education, for that, critical sort of connecting the dots and being able to we need to organize, right? Because it's not just right, the same calls around community defense, around stopping Cop City, right? Like, one of the demands of the Zone of Peace campaign, and that is the part of the work of the U.S. NATO out of our Americas network, is to close, all Cop cities and WINSEC, right? Because we understand that it's, those Cop cities are the internal sort of representation of what these Southcom bases down here look like. I've gone, around the region and have some footage around that stuff, and I'd actually love to do some documentary work around this, but to be able to see these are the same structures they're setting up, right? This interoperability that that Southcom and NATO use is the same language that Mayor Adams is using around the training facility that is going to be the next Cop City in New York, right, in the Queens. That every department needs to be interoperable, right? So there's every department has its own police department, and they're all getting trained in the same tactics. And of course, who's there but good old IOF also training them as well, right? So when we say it's the same struggle, it's because it is,
Facts. I feel like that's it. This is this is why I was on my little chat, like, Cloud, when can you come on? We gotta get you on, because this is time for real talk from real people, right? Yeah. Like, we can't keep doing this thing with the media and celebrities and all these people who pop up whenever they don't like the person who's given the message, even though it's the same message they ignored when somebody else was giving it, right? Like, we gotta we need to do more.
Yeah,
But
and I mean, the only reason that I really became a, quote unquote journalist is as an organizer, there are objectives to fill, and media is one of the ways you can do that. So Ajamu tapped me, and now I contribute. I'm a contributor for Bar. So it's because there are objectives, right, that to be filled, and you can use these things around.
Smart.
There we go.
Telling you,
All
we're
right.
serious fans out here.
Serious business. All right. Well, we got to wrap, right,
Yeah.
Jared? We're right at the
Hydrate,
the window.
Warrior
Hydrate,
class.
do my second wake
Clau,
and
thank
bake.
you very yeah. Anyway.
Can I just say, it took me
Please.
a year to find good weed in Peru. My people deserve. Okay, so this is why I'm saying Lima doesn't have enough water, literally, to grow anything. So I had to go 2 hours outside to find a good herbalist.
Elizabeth.
So my boy comes to me. We all appreciate.
That's love right there.
That's love right there.
Oh man!
Listen, nothing like ending on a good chat. There you go.
All right, everybody. Peace. Only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. Thanks again, everybody. Salute to the undefeated chat, and we'll catch you next week right here with more Saturday with Renee.